Welcome out to another Authors at Google, Artists at Google presentation here in Google, New York. Really excited today to have Kyle Cassidy in here with us. Kyle's been a freelance writer and photographer since 1999. His photographs have been published in the New York Times, Baaron's Financial, and the Philadelphia Inquirer, which he lives in Philadelphia. He writes frequently about technology and has been outspoken in the area of practical modern photographic theory. Largely known for his fashion and portrait photography, he became interested in photographing gun owners during the 2004 presidential election. So that's why what he's here to talk to us about today is Armed America, Portraits of Gun Owners in Their Homes. So a lot of you guys have this awesome hardcover book. The Washington Post said that each picture in Armed America could be a pro-gun advertisement or an anti-gun poster. The book is really more about the people than the guns, but I don't want to talk about that, so we're going to let Kyle talk about it. We're going to shoot to a quick video intro, and then we'll have him up. So let's do show the video to the video.
I'm doing a book called Armed America, Portraits of Gun Owners in Their Homes.
I'm Philip, part of armedamerica.org, and we're about to go do a portrait session with one of the people who's going to be in the book.
In 2004, I heard that half of Americans owned guns, and I wondered why. It seemed like an interesting project to drive across America, meet gun owners, and ask them.
Hi, how are you? I'm Kyle.
I decided early on that I wasn't going to turn down anyone who was willing to be in the book who I could physically get to. So there was no editorializing on my part as to who was going to be in and who was going to be not in and what positions were going to be represented. The people that I've talked to who have been eager to be a part of it have a story that they want to tell. They don't think that that their point of view is represented necessarily. They think that the media doesn't portray them when they talk about gun owners. I've heard that from a lot of people. I also get a lot of people who are very proud of their collections, and some of them have been collecting for years and they really just want to show off their guns. Of all the people that we photographed, I think my favorite was Avery. He lived in an apartment that he described as a bunker.
You want to try sitting in your command bunker?
Sure. You want me to
Just leave everything there.
leave everything there for the meantime?
Stretch it out.
He covered every square inch of the room with something. There was a sticker or a poster or a note. And it was so intricate that I could have spent hours in there just looking at the minutia on the wall.
There and there.
I had a really good time on that shoot.
Gun owners are everyday people. There's a lot of people who assume that because you own guns, you're more of a violent person. I don't believe that. I like the idea of your book because it shows a good cross-section of real people.
Okay, fantastic. It'll be great to meet you. Thank you, Mark. All right, bye. All right, Mark, 7 o'clock. He's cool with everything. He sounds like a really nice guy.
Lori and I are both hunters. We're both competition shooters. And we both shoot just for the fun of it as well. I got lucky because I have a wife that's enthusiastic about it. And I couldn't be a happier guy.
I feel sorry for the guys that don't have wives that enjoy it.
Mark and Lori were another really interesting subject. They were a couple from Portland who just seemed like really nice, fun people, and I never would have guessed if I saw them on the street that their personal hobby was collecting machine guns.
They're all different,
Very much so.
and that's why we like having different kinds of every kind.
For me, a big part of owning guns is it's a reflection of what I consider freedom in our country. I think the Second Amendment is kind of the reset button of the Constitution. And when the others start to fail, then it's time to look to it for redress.
The United States is pretty big. And I think it's a lot of ambition getting the whole thing, but at the same time it's a little bit of not quite knowing how big the country is until you actually drive across it.
What I want this book to be is to be told entirely by the people who own them. So there's no political introduction, there's no slant one way or the other.
Hello there. Hi. Diego? Yes. Kyle? This is Bill.
Hi, Bill. Nice to meet you. Go on inside. At this point, it's sort of unclear why I have a gun. I don't really know. It feels like a piece of property that I just kind of ended up having. It was like a period in my life when I was more interested in my rights, you know? I was like, oh, I can vote and I can register for the draft and smoke cigarettes and I can buy guns. And so I just kind of ended up buying guns.
I've had a lot of anti-gun people look at the book and say, wow, these people look like idiots, how are you convincing them to do this? And then the same pictures, pro-gun people will look at and say, this is really great, this is wonderful that you're showing this.
I understand what the statistics are about guns in America specifically, and I believe in nonviolence, and there is a certain amount of shame that you have with owning guns. You don't necessarily want to admit it.
America is a lot bigger than I thought. It takes longer to get from one place to another, and people are different in different parts of the country. Some places are almost like their own isolated countries, and I've met people who I never ever would have met and been exposed to ideas that I wouldn't have been exposed to otherwise. This isn't a book about guns, it's a book about people. My goal is that people with differing political views about this topic will be able to stand in an art gallery together and look at the same piece and have a conversation about it. Thanks for coming out. I haven't done anything yet. You can switch to the PowerPoint. Cameron missed one other of my very important publications for about a year and a half. I was the #1 Google image hit for Gorilla Suit. You should know that. What I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about what I was trying to do going into the book and some of the difficulties that I had. And then I'm just going to show a bunch of pictures that didn't make it into the book and maybe talk about why they didn't make it into the book. But I want really this whole thing to be more of a conversation for you and me rather than just me showing slides. So if at any point in time you want to ask something or say something, just put your hand up and we will make sure that you get a microphone and you'll be able to say what you need to say and we'll get all this good stuff. I'll talk a bit about what I was trying to do was approach a topic that's very visceral to a lot of people. And I wanted to do it in a way that was as unbiased as possible, which is, I think, a difficult thing for people to do. There are millions of books about guns, or at least tens of thousands of books about guns. And if you want to find a book that says guns are good or guns are bad, then it's easy to find something like that. And I was hoping to be able to come up with something that would let people look and come up with their own conclusions, and at the same time be able to have discussions with other people who had maybe differing views. So you could sit down over a coffee table, or you could sit in an art gallery and talk about things. And I noticed that so much of the gun debate in America when I started in 2004 was a lot of bumper sticker slogans and people sort of yelling things back and forth across at each other. And so I was trying to figure out a way that I could approach this topic that didn't put any of my personal beliefs into it. And hopefully when you're done reading the book, you have no idea what I think about this topic. And bias in photography starts from before you even take the photograph. It's about what you are thinking of taking a photograph of, and the things that you choose to send somebody on an assignment to photograph. So an editor can start photographic bias even before the picture's been taken. I was influenced by John Alton, who was a film noir lighter, who in his book Painting with Light said the camera doesn't lie. And I always thought that was completely bogus. Of course the camera lies. I've spent most of my career lying with the camera. And the more I thought about what John Alton said in conjunction with my own work, I realized that the camera here isn't really lying. It's telling something that's true. There's nothing really untrue in that photo. The camera represented it accurately, but I was misleading people with it by choosing a portion of the truth to tell and a portion of truth to show people. And we could do that in this room right now in photographing it from the back of the room where there are a lot of heads here. We can make this room look very full. And way over there's about 3 empty seats. And if you photographed just those 3 empty seats, it would look like the place was less full. I'm kidding. There's actually a couple empty seats over there. In the 1860s, when photography had just been invented, Matthew Brady, who was the big photographer in Washington at the time, sent a lot of his people out to photograph the Civil War. And Americans were really interested in this because it was happening, and there was this brand new technology that was bringing it to people. And this was a guy named Alexander Gardner he'd sent out to photograph the Battle of Gettysburg. And Gardner went around, he found this Union soldier, and he photographed him about 3 times. And he thought, wow, this isn't really as interesting as it could be. So he moved the body to a different place, and he made up this story of the sharpshooter's last stand. And the picture was all over the place. People came to see it and stood in line. And he went on and made these elaborate lies about going out months later and finding the sharpshooter's skeleton still there, when in actuality the people of Gettysburg had picked the battlefield clean almost immediately after it had happened. Now, if you want to know how to lie with the camera, you can Google anybody who people have strong opinions about. And this is how it's done very often now. In telling a truth, but only a slice of the truth. Does Hillary Clinton look like that? Well, obviously she did, but for a fraction of a second. And in picking the fraction of a second that you're going to show, you are making an editorialization about somebody. And that's something that I wanted to avoid when I was working on my book. We already talked about this. Right after my book came out, there was a glut of other I want to photograph gun owners projects that went around. And this one is from some people in England whose website is called Gun Owners of the South. And it made me a little cautious, wondering, why would you only want to photograph gun owners in the South? And it seemed to me, just looking at it, when somebody sent me this website, that I don't know these people, but maybe they had an idea of what Americans looked like, and they wanted to find some photographic evidence that backed that up. And then later they'd post it on a website saying that they were actually looking for people who believe in God as well as guns. And so it leads me to believe that they have an idea that an American is holding a gun in one hand and a Bible in the other, standing in front of a church with a shotgun, and they're going out and looking for pictures like this. I mean, I don't know their motives. They may not be doing that, but I think that's probably what they're going to end up with a lot of pictures of. And on the other side of the coin, there's a website called the Tigers Have Teeth Project. And this guy says he wants to combat the unflattering image portrayed by the media, and he's also looking for the faces of real gun owners, freedom-loving individuals who are proud and strong. So I'm thinking that this person has an idea of what they want gun owners to look like as well. And that was something that I was trying to avoid completely in trying to make an unbiased photograph. And I thought, how can I make an unbiased photograph? And my first thought was, well, I'll just bring people into the studio, because the studio is very neutralizing and everyone looks the same there. And so I brought some people in, and here they are in the studio. And I realized after looking at these that it tells me nothing. And I mean, you already know the punchline to the story, which is that I had this epiphany that if I move people to their houses, we learn something more about them. Because I think there's nothing that tells you more about somebody than what you surround yourself with. And here we know how they decorate their house, that they hang art on the walls. And these are some of the things that I found really fascinating in going to people's houses, was whether or not they had art on their walls, whether they had pets, or they had kids, or was their house clean, was their house messy. And I wanted to tell a whole story not just, these people have a gun. I wanted to say, these people are, and as much as I could say in this very small frame, this very small canvas, which is a single photographic frame, and to try and catch people in the way that, not they present themselves to others, but the way that they live themselves, the way they are themselves. And I think that I did a fairly good job of that, and hopefully you will agree. Now I'm just going to pile through some pictures from the book, and ones that made it and ones that didn't, and maybe just have a little discussion about what's good and what's bad. This is Gail and Michael's house, which was in Indiana, and this was one of the most difficult, but also one of the most rewarding shoots that I did, because I learned the most from it. This is their house when I got to it, and I spent the next 3 hours trying to photograph the house in a way that didn't show the clutter. And so I came up with these creative lighting techniques and things like that. And I also believed that the little girl here, you can't really see it in this photo, she has a pink AR-15, and I thought, that's the story. The little girl's got a pink AR-15. And after a couple hours at this, I realized that as much as I was trying not to, I was putting my own bias on these people in saying, if your house is going to be photographed, it has to be clean. Everything has to be put away, and it has to look like something from Better Homes and Gardens. And that's not who they were. And I was misrepresenting them. And once that bell went off in my head, I just put them right in the middle of the living room, and here they are in their house, and they're happy. And this is who they are. And I think that this is a much better depiction of them. Although, some people might have some personal prejudice, which I did. I don't anymore, I guess, about having your vacuum cleaner out and things like that. It's not how my house is when I want it to be that way, but it is how my house is right now. And after this photo, a door opened for me, and I realized once again that I was putting things into a picture that I shouldn't be putting things into. This is Bill, who I photographed. I think he was in Mississippi, and he had this cute dog. I'm not a dog person, but I wanted to take his dog home because I loved it so much, and it was so adorable. And while we were doing this photo, the dog just ran in circles around the room. So I have pictures of the dog leaping off of this bed thing and off of this sofa thing and blurred, and with no art on the walls, it still ended up being kind of a bland picture. And I didn't really know why Bill had guns from that. And photographing him here in his daughter's room between his bedroom and the kitchen, I think I get more of an idea that Bill is somebody who is very adamant about his family, and you're not going to mess with Bill's family. And I think that this tells something more about him than just the empty living room. Yes?
So quick question.
Mm-hmm.
How did some of these people react when they found out they weren't in the book?
I haven't heard angry statements or angry comments from people who are there were people who are a little disappointed. Bill actually made it in. It was just the first picture didn't make it. This was the picture that made it. There are some people who I've stayed in contact with, and some people who I haven't been in contact with afterwards. And I have yet to receive a letter saying, "Oh, I'm so sad I didn't make it in." But I assume that there are people out there who were But something that I will mention is that everybody that I have talked to has been happy with their portrait, which is heretofore unknown to me in the history of my career as a photographer. Yes?
Hello. Oh, so with this example in particular, isn't this a case of guiding the story in terms of, for the fact that what I had in mind of who this Bill person is in that first shot, as opposed to what I see here, which I don't know what conversation you had with him to say, well, how about we have you in the door frame here? That was really my initial question. And then as you were showing these examples, it sort of started specifying. But my initial question was, as you mentioned, along that according to that argument of the camera doesn't lie, and then you stated, well, of course there's bias because you choose your subjects.
Right.
And then the thing is that I would imagine once you enter the home, it's not you can sort of say briefly, this is my project, but as people who are having their photographs taken, they're oftentimes looking for direction. So it's like, do you want me to smile? Do you want me to look tough? Or is it that you say whatever? Like in the video, I saw you climbing on that bunk bed. Is it the subject who decides how they want to be portrayed, and then if they don't have that sort of conviction, like this is how I want to be photographed with my gun, then do you go ahead and say, well, why don't you try this? Or
yeah, that's a really, really good question, and it covers a lot of scope there, and one of the important ones is that there are multiple stories in a house, and I'm sure if somebody came to your house to do a Vogue piece on you, or Wired or something like that came to your house, there would be multiple avenues of a story that they could pursue in multiple directions. And anytime that a photographer says, let's do it here in the kitchen, or let's do it, here in the living room, then you're making an editorial judgment. And there's nothing, I don't think, that can be done about that other than put a whole bunch of cameras in Bill's house and leave them there for 6 months so that everybody can, really understand who he is, which is happening more and more now in the world, which is really unsettling to me. But in the case of photographing people in a particular environment, there were some people, when it came to their house, they had their gun or guns set up in some place, in front of the fireplace and laid out like that. And if somebody had an idea, I always photographed it because I thought that was part of their personality. But at the same time, what I wanted to get out of every single portrait session was a photograph that was beautiful and that could hang in a gallery by itself. So sometimes people would have something set up and I would say, well, let's try over here too. So I'm always looking for arches and doorways and good light and things like that. So a lot of the times the photographs are driven by the geography of the house in the same way that any photographer would going into anybody's house to do a portrait of them. I was telling myself while I was doing it, I was pretending that I was on an assignment photographing lottery winners, so that I would try and think of the person in the house rather than photographing people with guns. And that was a way that I tried to keep myself a step back from the elephant in the room, so to speak. Does that answer your question at all?
Yes. Especially your point about the geography of the space, their homes. I think, not so much a question as what I'd like to share from just, my personal experience viewing these two shots back to back is, aesthetically, I certainly see the merit in this second photograph as opposed to the first. This one, however, if let's say the project were, there was any sort of undercurrent, like, well, I want to show you what gun owners look like, and they don't look like how you would imagine them, or as they're portrayed in the media, this would sort of have that effect on me. Like, okay. Wow, I didn't, he looks like a nice guy, and he painted his, walls yellow. He must be a sunny guy, and look at that cute dog, So, this definitely has a different appeal or effect on me than the second portrait, where it's maybe more in line with that kind of macho, I am a man, I'm going to protect my home and family, that sort of persona.
Yeah, there's certainly that, and I agree that the two pictures do have different impact that way. There's another thing holistically that affected the book, which I called the sofa and fireplace curse, which is when I got back and started sifting through all the pictures, there were like 700 pictures of people in front of their fireplace and 700 pictures of people sitting on their sofa. So rather than have a book called Fireplaces and Sofas of Gun Owners, I started looking for alternate views, and that could have been factored into why this picture was chosen over the other one. And I'm going to go on unless you have another comment here. This is Chris, and Chris lived with two women whose names I don't remember because they didn't end up in the book, and they lived in a very cluttered house too. I think it was outside of St. Louis, and they knew that I was coming for a couple days, and their house was very cluttered, filled with boxes, and they'd pushed everything out of this room into the hallway and set this up, and I photographed them in there. And it looked very sterile to me, and I said, you know what, when I came in, I noticed you guys have a loom. And I'd like to photograph you with the loom, because I don't know anybody who weaves, and I think it's interesting. And the women would not be photographed in the clutter, and so Chris went down by himself, and I photographed Chris in front of his loom. And I think that, I don't know Chris personally, but I think that this tells a better story than the empty room for show. And we have Chris's cat, Lily, who died several weeks after we photographed this. So I was glad that Lily made it into the book. And I'm just going to skip on in case unless anybody has a question. Yes?
I notice there are a lot of cats in these pictures, I think it's great. I'm wondering, I can understand with dogs, spot, sit, we're taking a picture, but how much time did that add to your photographs, trying to get cats in the frame?
That's a good question. Yeah, there's 26 cats, 29 dogs, 4 birds, and a mouse. Reporters have been asking me for so long, I had to count them. Some cats made it in, some cats didn't make it in, some dogs didn't make it in, and it depended too on whether I was by myself and how friendly the animal was. I had an assistant with me for most of it, and a lot of his job was cat wrangler and dog wrangler, and so what Phil would usually do some people had dogs that would not only go get the newspaper, but they would read you the headlines from it. And other people just had dogs that were like wild animals. And so some of what Phil would do would be to drag a dog into a room, sit it down, and then leap out of the frame while the dog leaped after him, trying, playing and running around and grabbing balls and stuff like that. And he did the same thing with children, although they didn't have collars usually, so it was a little more difficult with the kids. It did add time, and there was one shoot that I was doing by myself that had 2 kids and 2 dogs, and I never got a picture of both kids and both dogs in the room because the kids would run in and out of the room, and the dogs would run in and out of the room, and so now they have 1 child and 2 dogs. And it's probably going to cause the other child psychological damage as he grows up in a house that has a picture that he's not in. And this is Stephen. Stephen had a very thematic house, and it was kind of easy to get the idea from him. He owns a bar and a boxing ring, and his house is sort of like something from a Dashiell Hammett novel, and so I decided to try and light it in that way. And there was this view, and then this is the one that actually made it into the book, and he was wearing that hat when we met him, and he's got an antique typewriter over there, and I think that this ended up being successful. And as you mentioned in your question about the subject driving how they wanted to look, I think that Stephen had a way that he wanted to look, and it was the way that he presented himself on the street and the way that he presented himself in his bar, and I think that we sort of went along with that and got a picture that I think he's very happy with. Yes?
So on that note, did you ever encounter people that were trying to present to you something that they weren't? Like the women that didn't want to be photographed in the mess. How did you weed these out, or did you even try that?
People, I'm not sure I understand the question. People who...
So I'm a user experience researcher, and so some part of my job is to actually go to people's houses and observe them, using their computers. And some people might clean up their desktop or clean up their bookmarks or not compute in a way that they usually do because someone's watching. And so does your coming in change that, or did you ever think about that?
I got a lot of calls from guys who would say, "Hi, I'm in Toledo, Ohio, and my wife says if I can have the house cleaned by Thursday, you can come over." So there was a lot of that, and there was a guy in the Pacific Northwest who sent me weekly updates of what room he was cleaning. So I think a lot of houses across America sparkled as I went past that wouldn't have otherwise. And I think the same thing's true if any magazine's coming to your house to photograph you. And if Wired came to your house, you'd probably vacuum or something first. So, and I didn't necessarily want to represent people exactly as they were in their everyday squalor. If you want to pick up that banana peel, it's fine with me. Does that answer your question? Sure. No, it doesn't. Sure is not yes.
Well, I wonder, like, if this is, he's like a dude meister, if that's, who he is. Really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, her comment was, Stephen looks to be like a dude meister. Is that who he is really? Stephen did enough that I was convinced. I think he may be playing a role, but it's a role that he seems to play all the time. He wore the hat. His house is dressed this way. Maybe he bought a bar and a boxing ring because it fit into. I'm serious. Maybe he's like, well, I own a bar. Let's buy a boxing ring because I love all those movies of the '40s where they own boxing rings and things like that. So I don't really know the driving forces in Stephen's life, but the image that we came up with here, I think, reflected the image that he was living, at least in the immediate area when I was there. His whole house looked like that. His bar looked like that. I didn't see his boxing ring, but and he dresses that way. Does that answer your question? Maybe not. And this is Drew, who is a police officer, and he bought guns only from other police officers. And so each of these guns has a story, like this is the story I thwarted the bank robbery with or whatever. And so these are personal meanings of him, and he has a great sense of fraternity with other police officers. And so this is part of the way that he reflects that. I tried for a very long time to photograph him in this. This is his gun safe. And it just didn't work, and I really wasn't, I think, finding anything out about him. And I moved him into his living room, which is, it looks like a pretty ordinary athlete's living room to me. He's got a boxing thing and what do you call that, punching bag, and satellite chair. And we see he has some art on the walls. He likes to watch TV and he likes to drink beer. Seems like an average kind of guy to me. And I think that ended up telling his story better than this guy's got a gun vault with 10 guns in it. I'm here if you want to disagree. And this is Bash, who lives in West Philly. And Bash was a very funny, upbeat guy. And I liked this picture because it looked funny, because it looks like he shot his dog. But I realized that I really couldn't put that picture in there. So I just look at it. And we got his dog up. And his dog was one of the ones who was not very well behaved. And his dog's name was Cisco, after the Routers. And Cisco would run everywhere. He was very impressed with my assistant, Phil, and he loved Phil and wanted to jump up on Phil. He probably wanted to jump up on me too, but one of Phil's jobs was to get between me and dogs that wanted to jump on people. And so Bash is actually holding Cisco between his knees here so that he can't rush Phil. And while I think that there are elements of this photograph that are technically good, they're leading lines and it uses the rule of thirds, it still leaves something to me. I didn't like the empty space on the upper right-hand corner. So I moved him out into his hallway, and I think that this composition is better, but he looks maybe a little stern. And I was worried because I had to photograph him from below because of the physical characteristics of the room. And I was concerned that I would be imbuing something into the photograph by photographing him from below like this. I didn't want to make him look menacing, and I realized that there's one thing about Bash that this photo is missing, and it's missing Cisco. And I think that that tells the story much better, because he does have this crazy dog. And this is one of my favorite pictures. And I have just a couple more. This is Howard. Lived in Pennsylvania. Howard's a big military collector. And ultimately, I didn't use this one, although it fills the frame, because it had all these guns pointed at his head, and I didn't think that that was, I was concerned about that image. I photographed him here, and I think this kind of shows his room even a little better. And then we have BA. She's in the Southwest somewhere, Arizona, I think. And there were two options with her. There are two very whimsical things about her that I found kind of endearing. One is that she spent so much time and energy on creating this castle for her cat, and the other one is that she still had her Christmas decorations up in June. And this is one half of her room, and this is the other half. And so she seemed divided between people and cats. You know, she had her cat, and then on the other side, all the family photos. And eventually I went with the family photos side of her room. But this is one place where just turning around 180 degrees, I think, tells a different story. And you know, you're like, oh, cat lady with guns. But I think that this is more neutral. I don't know if you agree or not. This one, this was in the Southwest, and I really did like this one. The cat just jumped up on the counter and got himself seriously overexposed, which is one reason that I couldn't bring myself to use it. And also the lines in the room are all bent from the wide-angle lens, and that drove me crazy. And if I was doing it now, I might hire a Photoshop artist to try and straighten out the lines and see if he could do something with the tones on the cat, because I like the picture otherwise. And none of the other pictures that I got really captured everything. And this is the one that I eventually went with. It's a little sadness because the cat was lost there. And this is Ashley, who lives in Georgia. Ashley's husband was in the Army, and 3 days after they got married, he got shipped off to Iraq. And so as a wedding present, he went out and he got them each 2 matching Colt 45s with consecutive serial numbers, which she was very happy about. And I liked this picture because it really tells the story, I think, of her and her husband. But I was concerned that she's involved in state politics in Georgia, and I was concerned that people wouldn't realize that that was the Georgia state flag in the background. So I tried her in the living room as well. These are some of the political campaigns that she'd worked on. And I think that just didn't tell enough of a story too. It told that she was a political activist, a political campaigner. She's politically involved, and that she's kind of whimsical. But eventually we went with this one, which I think tells more of an interesting story of her. I really like the shoes and the whiskey bottle in there, and she's got a copy of the Constitution hanging on the wall. And I'm pretty happy with that picture. And then just one more set. Looking through this to put this slideshow together, I can't believe what sort of brain aneurysm I must have had not to put this one in the book. The one we went with is a little more staid, but I really do like this one. That's Gavin. They're from Virginia, and that's all I brought. And I'd be happy to just have a conversation with you guys for whatever time we have left. Yes.
Hi. I was just curious about, did you make a conscious decision on having them hold the gun versus having it lay down on the couch or on the floor?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I don't know that it actually entered into my mind while I was doing it, but I certainly did tell some people, why don't you just leave it there? Or other people did try holding it this way or that way. And hopefully my driving force there was the aesthetics of the picture. And also, in some cases, I wanted to represent the relationship that people had with their guns. There's a guy in there who has 2 shotguns, and he inherited from his grandfather, and he's never fired them. And he keeps them as a reminder of his grandfather, because he remembered seeing them when he was a kid. And so I photographed them in the background with him in the foreground, because it wasn't something, like some people have a relationship with guns that is every day. They wear their gun here, and they, like a police officer or private citizen. And guns are very important to them, and other people they weren't as important to. So in some instances, I tried to show that in the photograph by having them hold something or not hold something. And other times it was just just what happened during the shoot. Like, I think Paul came out here and just leaned his rifle up against the sofa and sat down. And then sometimes somebody would say, "Oh, well, wait, let me get my gun too," and they would, come out with something. And I usually didn't interfere with how somebody was holding a gun. Usually, I don't think. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Another question now. How about I saw in the book some people had shirts with guns on them, or like tattoos, and they're displaying their tattoos. Was that like also conscious choice, or did they know you were coming that day and they decided to put on their gun shirt?
I think that I know there's a guy wearing a shirt that says peace, but it looks like a gun. He knew we were coming, and I'm pretty sure that he put that shirt on just for me. And there's a woman in there who's got tattoos of crossed guns on her back, and I very consciously had her turn around so we could see the tattoos in the photo.
Hi.
Hi.
Again. I was just wondering, were you asked by the children, any of the children in the families in the book, what your stance was on guns? And if so, what was your answer?
By the children or the
I mean, I suppose the entire family, but I'm really intrigued about if the children were curious as to. I mean, because clearly the adults had invited you to the homes, whereas the children didn't make that call, even if guns are part of their day-to-day lives.
No, I never had a conversation like that with any children. Yeah, I don't know. I think most of the children that I photographed were really young, like their age, and they were interested in let me show you my truck. Yes.
Yeah. It's interesting to see all those pictures where the gun is part of the family. It's used for many different usage. I mean, hunting, safety, whatever. But initially, the gun is about killing, right? Mm-hmm. You have a gun, you might kill an animal or somebody, and you also have a statistic about the number of Americans who has guns. Do you have statistics regarding ordinary people who have guns and who might have to use them, and where an accident might happen, or who might have use them to kill somebody, or to what are the statistics exactly? Because that's
I decided very early on that it wouldn't do me any good to memorize statistics or even look at them, because I don't want my opinion about guns to influence anybody else's. Then there are plenty of places out there where you can find statistics, and I didn't want to be answering a question with statistics, and I want to be able to plead ignorance, and I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, but you could Google some answers.
Hi.
Hi.
So I know you said you didn't want us to be able to know what your opinion was at the end of this, but I'm just wondering if throughout doing this project your opinion changed any?
I realized something during the process, which was everybody has some idea of what uses for guns are moral. And there's a line that says on the one side, policemen and soldiers should have guns, and on the other side it says, only toddlers shouldn't have guns. And in the middle somewhere, we all find the place where we're comfortable. And there are, I think, probably some uses for guns that nearly everybody would say, I don't have a problem with, the U.S. Olympic ski team or something like that. And then I think on the other side, there are uses for having guns that nearly everybody would think is immoral, robbing a liquor store, shooting, across your street or something like that. And somewhere in the middle, we all exist, everybody does. And I think that it's important for us to figure out not only what space in there, because we live in America, I think it's important that we not only figure out what space we occupy in that area between those two extremes, but also why. Why do we believe the things that we do? What things are important to us and why? Does that answer your question? Never sure if somebody's dashing for the catering table or the microphone.
Hi again.
Hi.
I'm curious, what's your next project?
While I was working on this, I met a World War II veteran who had a paratrooper tattooed on his arm. And I asked him about his tattoo, and he told me that he'd gotten it after he'd parachuted into Normandy during World War II. And he had this fascinating story about going to Edinburgh, Scotland, and getting very drunk and getting this tattoo. And I realized that nobody had photographed his tattoo in the last 40 years, and maybe nobody had asked him about when he got it. And I thought, I don't have any tattoos because I haven't thought yet of something that's so important that I want to remember it forever, that it deserves some space on my skin. And I realized that people who go to war and experience the things that they experience in war, whether or not they see combat, probably have had something that's worthy of writing on your skin. And I wanted to photograph people's tattoos and ask them about it, partly because I think it's something that is a part of history that's probably not being documented, but also because it would get me meeting people and hearing their stories, which is ultimately where I really want to be, meeting people who I wouldn't have met otherwise and learning about their lives.
So I'm assuming that whenever you photographed the people, the guns were unloaded?
There were some people who were extremely meticulous about showing me that every gun they had was unloaded. There were people, I think, there's one of the police officers at the very end of the book who made a point of telling me that his gun was loaded and he was wearing it when I got there. And I also had, my assistant was an ex-military combat photographer too, so he was also my I guess gun safety person, and if he thought that something wasn't right, then he would say something or do something or say we should go.
Okay, so do you feel that you can really capture the gun owner with their, I mean, there's kind of an implicit agreement whenever someone owns a gun that they have the willingness to use it. Do you feel that you really capture them in that mode if they have an unloaded gun in their hand?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
So if you gave me an unloaded gun and said, hold this and smile, I'd have no problem with it. If you told me it was loaded, I wouldn't even want to hold it. So do you feel you're really capturing the face of the real gun whenever they have the unloaded gun in their hand?
I think so. I wasn't out to get the looks that people would give just before they fired a shot off. And I think that a lot of the people that I photograph have spent a considerable time around guns, and a considerable amount of that time is with an unloaded gun. And some of them were extraordinarily meticulous about being safe. And I think that you'll see a lot of guns in the book that are actually open and the magazines are out of them, so that you can see just by looking at it that the guns are unloaded. And I think that the guns in many of these people's houses spend an awful lot of time, probably the majority of their time, unloaded. So I don't think that I didn't catch who they were because their guns weren't loaded. And some of the guns had never been loaded. Like Howard, the guy who's got 300 guns in that room of his house. I asked him how many of his guns he'd shot, and he said 3. So for him, when he got one, it was never something that he meant to load and fire. It was something that was the Model 93, and he had the Model 92, and he had the Model 94. So this is where this goes. And so for him, it was very different. And then also there were people who there were some people who said, I have this gun in case somebody breaks into my house or somebody tries to rob me on the street, and I have this gun, and I have this loaded gun. And people like police officers, like, I have this gun because I'm expecting that there may be some point where I need to use it. But then there were also plenty of people who were target shooters or something like that, and said, well, I couldn't imagine pointing a gun at a person. So I think it really has to do with the broad spectrum of reasons that people gave for owning guns too, as to how they would look while they were holding it. That was a very rambling answer, but I hope I hit your question somewhere in there.
No, that's good. Thanks.
Thank you.
How did you get the word out that you're going to be doing this project? Because it seems that a lot of the people that you photograph, you wouldn't sort of suspect that they were gun owners.
I think that turned out to be a good thing. I initially thought I would just be able to go to a gun store and say, hey, I'm doing this, I'm this objective journalist, and I'm going to do this project on gun owners, and they would just give me a bunch of people's names, and that totally didn't happen. And but I found a lot of people incidentally Like, we might be sitting here right now, and I would just say, oh, I'm doing this project on gun owners, and you'd be like, oh, you should talk to my brother. And because I wasn't finding, 100 people in a row at a gun show, I was finding people who probably don't fit as much the mold of people you would expect to find at a gun show or at a gun range or something like that. And I think that having a lot of incidental gun owners in there serves the project much better than going to a place where you're going to find 100 self-identified gun owners. One thing that I realized while doing this, I was at a vegan potluck for Thanksgiving in 2006, I think it was, in Portland, Oregon, which is about as far from my home as you could get. And there's this, come to the vegan potluck if you're a vegan orphans potluck. And I was sitting around there talking about what I was doing. And the guy across the table from me says, well, I have a gun because. And so meeting people like that in unexpected places really, I think, added to it. And I realized after that if you go into a room and there's 100 people in the room, 35 of them might be gun owners. But if there's a guy wearing an NRA hat, you're like, that's what a gun owner looks like. And you don't know the other 34 of them. And I think I got a good opportunity to meet the other 34. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but I want to say thank you very much from Google New York and the at Google program for coming out. We really enjoyed your presentation. Kyle's going to be signing books at the table right over there, so if you got one, please stick around and line up orderly. And again, please, everyone, thank Kyle one more time for coming out.
Thank
Really
you so much for having me.